Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Wang, and I am the ecosystem development lead at Parity Technologies, as well as the person who's in charge of the Substrate Builders Program. So since many teams have kind of been asking us privately about what exactly does the Substrate Builders Program offer, and many teams are confused about how the Builders Program works, we thought it would be really good to give a crowdcast here today, kind of describing and giving an overview of the Builders Program. To do that today, we would like to kind of structure this quite simply. So first, we'll talk about a little bit about the motivation for why the Builders Program exists. And then we'll give a summary of the offerings of the program and what the program is. We'll talk about the current state of the program and some of the projects that are building with us in the Builders Program. We're going to talk about some related initiatives. So these are initiatives that are maybe somewhat adjacent to the program that many of you guys might be interested in, but aren't part of the program itself. And finally, we're going to talk about some future directions that we might take in not so much detail. So really simply, the reason we started the Builders Program was because Parity and Web3 Foundation had many resources to support these teams. However, there was a lack of structure for these resources. So if we look back in 2019, we had about 60 projects or so building on Substrate around late 2019. And we had a limited number of BD people in Parity who were in charge of talking to many of these people at once. And each of these teams came into the conversation with very different needs. And because of these needs and because of a lack of structure, we spent a lot of energy kind of coordinating internally, as well as coordinating with them to get them what they need. And since Parity is a very business-focused company, and we really care about kind of bringing adoption for the products that we build, we wanted to make sure that Substrate can actually get successfully adopted and used by all of these teams. So these users kind of came to ask for our help because Substrate as a platform is quite complicated, and blockchains themselves have so many components, and there's so many diverse communities and stakeholders within the blockchain industry. So these users kind of need both technical help as well as kind of non-technical help that we ourselves have the internal resources as well as expertise for. We might not have the expertise for example, to help them with certain parts of their business model, because that's not what we do. We are a blockchain company, but we can definitely help them with a lot of things related to more crypto native components and stakeholders. So because they used to kind of get these resources in a very unstructured way, we kind of had to develop a custom human support structure for each of these support requests. And as a result, it was also internally very hard for us to keep track of these projects and kind of get the constant communication feedback that we wanted so that we can make Substrate better for our end users. So really what the Builders Program is basically pulling together all of the resources that we thought would be useful for these teams from within Parity into one support structure. So there's really four main categories of support that the Builders Program officially provides. So the first would be community support or marketing support. And this includes stuff like launch marketing support. So if your project is launching, generally you need to get validators on board if you're launching a chain and various other stakeholders on board. And so because we have the resources and because we've launched multiple blockchains before as a company, we can definitely support your launch through media announcements, third-party media, as well as kind of our personal blogs, etc. Parity also hosts multiple events, such as .con.day, Sub-Zero, Web3 Summit, etc. And by being part of the Builders Program, you get in a way, a easier pipeline, easier channel to communicate with us, to kind of give talks at these at these events or participate in these events. We also help a little bit with social media community building, and we of course announced the successful entrance into the program in social media as well. And then the second would be business development support. And really the thing that we're most helpful for here would be essentially providing an environment as well as opening up channels so that your team can talk to relevant blockchain ecosystem players. So these could be potential clients, potential users, potential technical partners, potential investors, etc. Speaking of investors, we also provide indirect financial / fundraising support. And the way we generally do that will be through introductions to either the Polkadot Venture Network or the Polkadot Ecosystem Fund, as well as some other incubators, accelerators in our ecosystem. However, the program itself doesn't give money directly to these projects. And finally, and the most important part, which is why this thing is highlighted in pink, is technical support. So we have a very strong crypto native community, and most of our projects that are building are very technical and already quite knowledgeable about stuff like Rust. So sometimes our documentation itself, or maybe certain public channels, might not be entirely sufficient for these projects' needs. So the first thing that we offer in technical support is a focus channel with all the program members in there. As well, and tech support personnel from Parity, as well as Gavin himself, will be there in this focus channel to answer a lot of your technical questions. We also have regular office hours, which is every week, twice a week actually. One targeted towards a more European / US time zone, and one targeted towards a more Asian time zone, with a tech support person as well as a business support person to kind of give you certain feedback and answer certain questions. And we also kind of give this kind of technical support in both Chinese and English, because we have actually many builders in China who are building very high quality projects. And finally, which is something that's not listed on the website, is we're starting to do some webinars for certain topics that many teams have in common found interesting. And we've kind of pooled it currently to only give these webinars to Substrate Builders Program teams. And finally, we have a strategy and feedback session with each of these teams. So every 6 weeks or so, we have one-on-one check-ins to make sure that they're kind of getting the support and the feedback that they need. So a question that some of you guys might get is, what are kind of the criteria for being accepted into the program? So the broad answer is that there's no exact set of criteria to answer the program. We kind of take a look at each project in a very holistic manner. The most important thing for now is that you must be a chain builder who's building a chain on Substrate. It doesn't matter if you're building your chain to be a set isolated Substrate chain, or a bridge that's built on Substrate, or a chain that's connecting to Polkadot, as long as it uses Substrate and it's a chain and not a surrounding component. But otherwise, we kind of have certain criteria that are similar to the way that some VCs would judge certain projects. And with the main difference being that we generally give preference to projects that are launching sooner, so that this way they can get more time-sensitive support, because from what we've seen, these projects generally need the most help around launch time. And also, we generally prefer later stage projects, because the Builders Program itself doesn't really help you that much with generating your business idea, because that's not Parity or Web3 Foundation's strong suit. We're really more of a technical company who can provide support on the crypto business side. So now I kind of want to talk a little bit about kind of the current participants in the program. So far we have 20 teams that have joined, and each of these teams kind of have their own unique focus, even though we don't necessarily care about exactly what you're focusing on as the admissions criteria. So far, all of these teams either have a very strong business model / technical prowess and are relatively close to mainnet, or at least they're well towards that. And in terms of kind of the types of projects or like the categories of projects that are building, we have by far the most well represented would be DeFi. And this kind of echoes current trends in DeFi, as well as kind of demonstrates in a way, the allure of Polkadot substrate support for interoperability, flexibility, shared security, etc. And then second, we have infrastructure, and then supply chain, and we have a various kind of variety of other applications that are also building. So really, I think we're excited about kind of the diversity here, because this kind of demonstrates that there's a pretty broad interest from teams in Substrate's various strengths, and it shows that you can really use Substrate to build any chain that you would like, no matter what kind of application it is, or whether it's an infrastructural component. And through the Builders Program so far, many of these teams have not only, and of course the Builders Program is only a part of their technical journey, but many of these teams have in the past months made significant progress, and they've also kind of formed multiple business collaborations amongst each other. And many people are kind of building complementary components to kind of work together and complement each other's strengths. And so from the 3 to 4 months in the program, we've kind of, one question that just came in is if a parachain would be an option for consideration. And definitely a parachain is an option for consideration, because currently by far the easiest way to build a parachain would be to use Substrate. And so any chain that's built on Substrate, whether it's a parachain or not, is under consideration to join the Builders Program. So back to some of the kind of insights that we've had. So in the past 3 to 4 months of the program, each of the team has so far been pretty strongly engaged. So they've all been actually relatively active in our offerings, even though technically speaking, you don't actually need to be active to be in the program. And we don't really care that much if you're super involved in the program. However, I think most of these teams have found the offerings relatively useful, so they've been engaged anyway. And some of the things that we've learned is that first, by far the most widely used thing and by the most desired kind of support category is technical support. And we think that this kind of signals the technical strengths and dedication of the projects in our ecosystem. And so some detail is that our office hours, 2 office hours per week, are generally have relatively frequent participants, and they've asked more complicated questions in these voice chat sessions, whereas the private Builders Program Riot channel generally is reserved for questions that are easier to type / shorter to answer. But I think these two these two types of tools complement each other quite well. However, we also see that public channels are still actually quite often used for even many of the Builders Program participants, because in the public channels, there's actually a significantly larger number of developers who are skilled in Polkadot / people who are building various different parts, either internally as a core dev or externally as a third party, who are able to kind of answer certain more nuanced questions. Whereas the Builders Program really only has a certain number of developers, technical support developers supporting it right now. And another thing that we've noticed is that many projects that are in the Builders Program have kind of talked to each other. And while they're talking to each other, they realize that they could reuse or take certain elements of other people's modules, palettes, etc. And it kind of shows that due to the interoperability and the reusable structure that Substrate provides, technical support and collaboration happens not just between Parity / Web3 Foundation and the external teams, but also between the teams themselves. So our builders generally, because our builders have generally echoed the open source mentality of sharing their ideas and their tech, I think that even if you're not in the builders program, if you see a team in the builders program that's building something that you're interested in, I guess, using or collaborating with, if you check out their GitHub, for example, and you see some palettes that you want to use, then you should definitely either contact them yourselves, or you can contact us and we can help facilitate certain conversations, because we want to kind of move the ecosystem forward. And the third thing that we've noticed is that by far the most common question that people initially ask, and they usually don't ask it after a few times, is usually on what are the timelines for, let's say, Kusama's parachain support, Polkadot mainnet Substrate version 2, for example. And unfortunately, usually we're not able to give answers here. But I think the conclusion that we've found is that luckily most of our teams that are in the Builders program are at least are about a few months, or at least a few months away from launching their mainnet. So luckily speaking, the teams can kind of grow and mature along with Polkadot. And usually timeline does not stop these teams from doing most of what they need with Substrate. And the only exception would be that, when the project is ready to become a parachain or parathread. And next, I would like to talk a little bit about the few related initiatives that are kind of complementary to the Builders program. So the first thing would be, which is a direct fundraising source, is the Web3 Foundation grants. So Web3 Foundation grants essentially provides funding to teams that are building interesting components for the Substrate / Polkadot ecosystem. And we kind of give these grants out without taking any equity to teams that are, whether the team is building a component with the business use case or not. So many of the Builders program teams have also applied to or are applying to grants. And many of the people who've gotten grants have later on applied to the Builders program as well. So you could definitely do both at the same time. Another program that's about to start is the Web3 Foundation Bootcamp, which is going to be physically located in Shanghai, China. So the bootcamp is quite similar to the Builders program, but the difference is that they're more of an accelerator, and they're generally targeted towards a little bit of early, like slightly earlier stage projects who really need particular support with their business model as well as technical support. So the bootcamp also offers similar technical support to what the Builders program offers, but it's a much bigger time commitment for these projects, and would be generally recommended for projects who want more of like I guess, hand-holding. And the bootcamp as well has a preference for projects who are interested in the Asian market. So another initiative that just got announced about a week ago is the Substrate Delivery Partners, which is a newly announced program for people who are, for development shops who are, who can help teams, for example, in the Builders program, build chains. And so the delivery partners essentially ensures that these development shops who are accepted into or are working with the delivery partners program are fully educated on Substrate, and then they can ensure that they can deliver the end product in the to a very high standard. And finally, another initiative is the Polkadot Venture Network. So essentially, because we have such a broad network of investors, not just those who've already invested in Polkadot, but also those who are interested in general in just investing in Polkadot ecosystem projects. We've essentially kind of talked to each of those investors and kind of pooled them together into one initiative, so that if you are a project with a strong business model and your project could be, and you believe your project is fundable, fundable by a for-profit entity that would take equity / tokens, etc., you can contact us, and you may qualify to basically have your pitch deck basically sent all at once. Sent basically to every single one of the investors in the investor network. And then finally, we realized that there's really no initiative that fits every person's needs. So if you really don't see a program or something really structured that fits your particular need, of course you can contact us, and then Parity will kind of do our best to try to support your needs in the best way possible. So it seems like we have one question that came up. One more question that came up. Let's see. So the first question is, can we participate in the Web3 bootcamp remotely? And the answer to that is, I think they highly prefer teams who participate in it in person. And also, unfortunately, I believe the applications are now closed. They're currently going through the second rounds of interviews or the first round of interviews, I believe, for these projects. And second question is, given the current coronavirus global crisis and its impact towards financial markets, can you comment on how some of the 20 earlier accepted chains might be recalibrating their business or financial model? That's a really, really good question. I don't think we've talked to each of these teams about this particular topic. However, the ones that we have talked to seem to definitely have either are thinking about postponing their fundraising, or they're definitely aware that their fundraising, for example, will take longer, and they're kind of definitely slowing down a lot of their BD efforts. And I think we kind of see that across numerous industries and not just within blockchain. And so finally, if anyone has any other question, feel free to ask. And if you don't think of a question now, feel free to email me at ericw@parity.io, and you could check out more information on the Builders Program at builders.parity.io. Does anyone have any questions that you might want to ask? Well, great. It seems like there's no more additional questions for now. So if you have any questions on any of this, or you're interested in applying to the Builders Program, you could definitely send me a personal email. And I'm looking forward to talking to some of you, and I really hope that this was helpful for you guys to understand kind of some of the offerings that the Builders Program provides, as well as some of the other offerings in the Polkadot Substrate ecosystem. Thank you, guys.